Well, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about the influence of freedom of choice on subjective well-being. And to do so, I would like to start with a personal story. So I'm Italian, as you might have guessed from this slight accent that I carry with me, which is much better than the German accent that we heard before. So we already start well. But anyway, so when I left Italy to go to the United States to do my PhD, one of the first pieces of mail that I found in my mailbox is this one. It was a flyer that was asking me to choose my natural gas supplier. Now, nobody in Italy had ever asked me to choose the natural gas supplier before. I mean, that gas was not a matter of choice, you know, and still, my relationship with gas was pretty good. Now, all of a sudden, it became a matter of choice. And because I was asked to make a choice, I was intended to make the best possible choice of natural gas supply ever made. You know, I would nail that choice. I was a PhD student. I was not stupid. So I agonized over this choice for a couple of days. And in the end, I did make a choice. I chose a supplier. Was it the best supplier ever? Who knows? My relationship with gas pretty much remained the same. I would wake up in the morning, make my espresso maker, put it on the stove, turn on the gas would flow. I would get a reasonable bill at the end of the month. So I don't know if I made the best choice, but what I know for sure is that those 2 days of my life would have been so much happier if I hadn't had to think about gas all the time. Now, was that choice worth it? That's the question I've been asking myself since I've tried to do some research, and I would like to share with you some insights about this research. So, first of all, don't get me wrong, freedom of choice is a great thing. Right? Most of the time it's a great thing. Economists, psychologists, lay people agree that choice has a host of beneficial consequences, both material and psychological, because when we choose, well, we can select the option that we like the most, or at least the option that we dislike the least. And this way we can maximize our subjective well-being, our satisfaction. But the first insight from my research is that choice is not always and necessarily a good thing, and there are situations in which, in fact, freedom of choice can decrease our happiness and satisfaction. One of these situations is when the choice is from among all undesirable options. So we tested this idea with Sheena Iyengar from Columbia University. How? We called participants to the lab and we told them that they would taste one of 4 innovative yogurt flavors. Now the catch there is that all these yogurt flavors were pretty disgusting, and they were sage, tarragon, chili powder, and celery seeds. Believe me, they are disgusting. I tried them repeatedly, several times, to ensure that they were really disgusting. So now, these participants would come to the lab. Half of the participants that we call the choosers were free to select one of these yogurt flavors to taste. The other half, which I would call the non-choosers, were imposed one of these yogurt flavors to taste at random by the experimenter. So one would predict, well, the choosers on average are going to like the yogurt that they tasted more, are going to be more satisfied with the outcome of their choice. Because they have an advantage over the non-choosers, they can select the least disgusting yogurts. And in fact, we found the opposite result. We found that choosers, on average, liked the yogurt less, ate less yogurt, and were overall less satisfied with the outcome of their decision relative to the non-choosers. So we tried to take this idea outside of the lab and into the real world, and we thought, what is a situation in which individuals have to choose from among all undesirable options, and in this case, freedom of choice would in fact decrease their subjective well-being, their happiness, and their satisfaction with the choice. So one of these situations is when individuals have to choose among health treatments. So with Sheena Iyengar and Christine Orfali, also at Columbia University, we interviewed groups of parents, 2 groups of parents, American and French parents, whose babies were put under life-sustaining treatment after birth for various problems. So all these parents faced at a certain point the terrible decision of either interrupting life-sustaining treatment, risking the death of the baby, or continuing life-sustaining treatment, risking either death or severe neurological impairments. Both groups of parents experienced the same terrible decision of interrupting the treatment and the same terrible consequence of losing their babies. Now, there was one critical difference within these 2 groups, is that because of differences in the medical decision-making system across the 2 countries, the American parents made this decision by themselves. They were free of making this decision. while the French parents had this decision made for them by the doctors. And what we found is that the American parents who chose suffered much more than the French parents. They had much more problems in coping with the death of the babies, overall experience, much more negative emotions, and much more difficulties in life. So the first insight of my research is that choice freedom does not always improve subjective well-being, especially in the case when choice is made from among all undesirable options. Then in that case, actually, freedom of choice decreases happiness, satisfaction, and well-being. Now, freedom of choice has an influence, positive or negative, on our well-being because it makes us feel in control of our action and responsible for the outcome of these actions. So if you experience something good and you chose it, you credit yourself for that, and so you rejoice even more. If you experience something bad and you chose it, you blame yourself for that, so you suffer even more, as in the cases I've just shown you before. This means, though, that if the act of choosing is not accompanied by a sense of control and responsibility, then choosing becomes very similar to not choosing. So let me show you this example. Imagine that you have to choose one of these 4 coffees. These are actually real descriptions of coffees. So you're a chooser. You want to make the best choice. You want to pick the coffee that you like the most. It's kind of difficult to understand which one you're going to like the most. I mean, do you like gutsy richness more than slightly earthiness? Or do you like nutty earthiness more than unusual depth? I mean, who knows, right? If you pick one of these coffees and ends up to be good, can you really credit yourself and rejoice for this choice? And if it ends up to be bad, can you really blame yourself and suffer for that choice? So many times as choosers, we are confronted by options, and we really do not understand what is the relative quality, what is the difference in the relative qualities between these options, either because the information we are given is not diagnostic or because we are not expert enough in understanding this information. So when it is difficult for us to discriminate among the choice options in front of us, it is also difficult to feel in control of our choices and responsible for the outcome of that choice. So again, we tested in the lab with Anne McGill, my advisor at the University of Chicago. We asked participants to come to the lab, and we told them that they would taste one of 4 different coffees. And we described these different coffees in a way that was very undiagnostic, very similar to the descriptions I just showed you before. Again, half of the participants, the choosers, would read the description and select one of the coffees to taste. The other half would read the same description, but did not choose. They were imposed one of the coffee to taste by the experimenter. And what we found that there was no difference in how much they liked the coffees and how satisfied they were for their decision between these 2 groups. Because even if the choosers had the advantage of choosing that one coffee that they thought it was the best, they didn't feel in control of this decision, and they didn't feel responsible for the outcome of that decision, so they didn't feel any differences in satisfaction and in well-being relative to the non-choosers. So the second insight here is that choice freedom influences subjective well-being when and only when it is associated with control and responsibility. Now, the third insight is that even though sometimes choosing makes us feel worse off relative to not choosing, and even if other times choosing and not choosing is exactly the same thing in terms of subjective well-being, we still obsess on choosing. We still insist on making these choices. Why? So with Chris Shee, also at the University of Chicago, we thought that it is because we overestimate the benefit of choosing, our ability to pick this best option. And we underestimate the costs of choosing, which are cognitive costs, it takes a lot of effort, emotional costs, you regret all the choices that you do not make, and also opportunity costs. If you're choosing, you cannot do something else. So again, the inspiration came from one personal story as a PhD student. So life as a PhD student is not very good, not very happy. So I had to take an exam, cognitive psychology. So I walked in the exam, and the teacher gave us a pool of questions. But she told us that we had to answer only a subset of these questions, and we were free to choose what questions to answer. So what did I do? I spent all the test time pretty much choosing what questions to answer, and I didn't have any time left to actually answering the question that I chose. And you may understand that the test didn't go very well, and I switched to social psychology instead. I thought that was better. So we thought to test this in the lab to see whether I'm the only weirdo out there, or there are other people that really underestimate the cost of choosing. So we called participants to the lab. We told them, look, you have to do a math test. And this math test, you have a pool of questions, but you're going to answer only a subset of this pool of questions. Half the participants, the choosers, were free to select this subset of questions to answer. Half of the participants, the non-choosers, were given the subset of questions to answer by us, by the experimenter. We told all the participants that the score was based on two elements. One, how many questions they got correctly, and two, how much time they spent taking the test. So the longer the time taking the test, the more their score would be negatively affected. So what happened? These are the results. The choosers, the red bar, actually performed worse than the non-choosers, did worse at the test than the non-choosers, mostly because they took too long taking this test. And they also felt worse than the non-chooser. When we asked them, how did you feel while taking this test, they say, like, not very good. Now, after taking the test, before knowing the result, we told all participants that there were these two groups in the study, the choosers and the non-choosers. And we asked participants to predict who did better at the test, who felt better at the test, and also we asked them, if you had to take this test again, in which of these two groups would you like to be, the choosers or the non-choosers? And both choosers and non-choosers had the same response. They predicted the choosers to perform better at the test, the choosers to feel better while taking the test, and they would want it to be choosers if they had to take the test again. They were wrong, right? The choosers did not perform well, did not feel better. But when we asked, why do you think all these good things happen to choosers, they said, because the choosers can pick the best, easiest question to answer. They completely discounted the cost that was attached to this choice, which in this case was a time cost, a temporal cost, and they were well aware of the fact that there was this time cost. But they discounted it, and they overestimated the ability to pick easy questions to answer. So this is the third insight, that regardless of the effect of choice freedom on subjective well-being, people insist and obsess on choosing. So three main insights. The first one is that choice freedom does not always improve subjective well-being. Sometimes it decreases subjective well-being. Sometimes there is no difference between choosers and non-choosers in subjective well-being. The second one is that choice freedom influences subjective well-being when it is associated with control and responsibility, and only when it is associated with control or responsibility. Otherwise, even if you're a chooser, you feel like a non-chooser. And finally, regardless of the effect of choice freedom on subjective well-being, people want to choose. So as consumers and as citizens, we are surrounded by calls to make choices that in the past were made for us by other people, marketers, public policymakers, experts. So to the marketers and the public policymakers in the room, the idea here is that maybe choice should not be considered as a blanket solution for all problems. And maybe they should consider when the costs attached to choice overwhelm the benefits of choice. And so just pushing choice in the hands of the customers or the citizens not necessarily solve their problems. And for all of us, consumers and citizens, I think the idea here is that maybe next time that you feel this urge of choosing, just relax, okay? So take it easy, embrace what you have, and think about it like maybe this is not a terrible scenario. My take is that freedom of choice is freedom of choosing, but it's also freedom not to choose, to decide when you do not want to choose. Because I think that the risk out there is that we spend a lot of energy and effort and resources making all these little choices and feel all empowered and in control because of these choices, like my natural gas supplier. And in fact, there are big choices, big decisions out there that would really make difference in our life, in our well-being, and we just simply ignore them because we are too busy choosing. And thank you.